I hope you all had a good lunch, a good break, did some stretching. Well, we took that raccoon down. I didn't see anybody doing that during lunch, but I hope you stretched your legs a little bit and are back and ready for a good afternoon, because there's still a lot of good information to hear about. This is the time of our symposium when we award a native landscape. If you've been the last few years, the first Native Landscape Award went to the Ben Hill County Library in Fitzgerald, Georgia. That was in 2010 or 2011, one of those. And then the next one went to, and I'm telling you this so you can go look at some of these places. They're just beautiful. The Wilson Hospice House in Albany was the winner of the second Native Landscape Award. And then just last year, it was the Macon Museum of Arts and Sciences. So those are truly, yes, truly beautiful places. And you're seeing the photographs now for the landscape that will receive the Native Landscape Award this year. It is, you can see already, it is from a private residence. It is the Miss Betty Jenwright landscape in Thomasville, Georgia. Many of you in the room may know Miss Jenwright. I haven't had the pleasure of meeting her yet, but this, not only the garden, but the gardener was highly recommended for this award. Beth Grant is here today and will accept this award because Mrs. Jenwright is not with us today. But I'll read some of the text that Beth prepared as her friend and fellow gardener, and while you look at the photographs. Betty Jenwright has been in love with native plants her whole life. As a little girl, she would visit her grandparents at El Soma Plantation in Thomas County, where Brookwood School is now. She was entranced by the wild azaleas and loved to sit among the foot-tall violets and yellow butterworts in a swampy area at the bottom of the hill. When her papa took her driving on the country roads, she would suddenly ask him to stop. "Papa, stop." And when she spotted wildflowers, she would jump out to pick them. Some of her favorite memories are one time they got stuck in the mud when she was out trying to pick some ladies' tresses orchids. Her grandmother, Big Mama, often allowed her to pick armfuls of flowers in the gardens and woods as long as she put them in water as soon as she could. Her mama told her she wouldn't be allowed to pick any the next time if she failed to do this. This is how she began her lifelong enjoyment of flower arranging. When she was just a little girl, she met Betty Comarec, who taught her and her friends all about nature. These little girls called their teacher Betty Nature. When Betty Jenwright married her husband Robert, she learned that her mother-in-law was good friends with this woman, and this led to a lifelong friendship between the two. For years before she founded the Birdsong Nature Center, Betty Comarec would call a group of women, including Betty Jenwright, Harriet Hawkins, and Miss Julie Neal, for all kinds of interesting nature experiences. They learned about many subjects and had a whole lot of fun. On an especially memorable field trip southwest of Tallahassee, the group observed the traditional practice of grunting worms out of the ground. It must have stuck in Miss Betty's memory. She says twice a year, in May and October, Betty Comarec would take the group to the mountains in North Carolina to study wildflowers. And this is how Miss Betty Jenwright started learning how to identify them. At first she thought she would not tax her brain learning botanical names. But she heard them so many times she began to use them herself. Betty Jenwright has been a supporter of and volunteer at Birdsong Nature Center since before its founding in 1986. She also had a good friendship with Angus Goulson. These are the botanical what? All-stars? What do you want to call it? Elders, yes. Yes. think of another word, and we'll think of that in a minute. It's just the greats right here. Angus Goulson, Wilson Baker, all of that group. And so she learned from them. I want to tell you this one right here was especially interesting to me. So apparently they used to go on the Highway 84 right there in Grady County, and they saw a few of those trout lilies at the edge of the road. And then finally one day Wilson Baker decided to walk on in there, and what a treasure he found if you've ever been down there to the Wolf Creek Preserve. Okay, I see some of y'all looking like you haven't, so when you get home, Google it. You'll be astounded. They had been soliciting, it's about 10 acres of trout lilies and trilliums along the creek bed there. After 2 years of soliciting donations for matching funds for the grant to purchase this 10 acres and then preserve it, the volunteers were over $40,000 short in 2009. They began to think they'd have to seek a loan to buy the property. Betty had been out to the Birdsong Nature Center that spring, and she called a phone number that was written on a seed packet, thinking that she was calling a volunteer that she had met there. But the woman who answered the phone had no idea what she was talking about. As their conversation continued, they realized they did know each other, and Betty started telling her all about Wolf Creek and the trout lilies. Betty took her to the place for a visit, and like everyone else, she was wowed. Betty gave her a letter soliciting funds, but the woman went on back home and they didn't think any more of it. Several weeks later, Dan Miller, the guy out there selling plants in the cold, who was also instrumental in preserving this property, received a phone call from this same woman, and she asked Dan, "How much money do you need?" And he told her. She just said thank you and hung up. Sometime later, he received a phone call from Grady County saying that they had received a donation from this same woman, who chooses to remain anonymous, for the over $40,000 that they needed. Betty credits Providence for this serendipitous course of events, not wanting to take any credit for herself. But what we all know is she was in the right place at the right time and spoke about her passion. That's what we know. In the 70s, Betty wanted to learn how to be a flower show judge and joined the Briarcliff Garden Club in Thomasville, to which her mother and Julie Neal's mother had also belonged. After talking with Marge Willis, I know Marge's mother was also a member of that club. She, to qualify to be a flower show judge, she had to win 5 blue ribbons in 3 shows for both horticulture and design. She completed the training and became a flower show judge in time for the April 1976 Bicentennial Rose Show. In just 2 years, she was elected president of the Thomasville Council of Clubs and was soon selected as district director, and then served 16 years on the state board of the Garden Club of Georgia. During the Jimmy Carter administration, as many Garden Club members did, she went to Washington and arranged flowers in the White House and at the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C. A few years after that, she and her husband, who was an architect, built this home that you see in the slideshow here, and they decided to keep the gardens natural, supplementing existing trees and plants with more native plants, especially a wide variety of native azaleas. She says that Miss Julie and Mr. Leon Neal took her to a nursery in Colquitt where she could buy wild azaleas for $2 a pot. She said, "I guess that's why I have so many." But what a beautiful garden she has. I did call Marge. Beth put together that information from interviewing and her longtime friendship with Miss Betty, but I called Marge to say, "Marge, what would you want to add to this?" And a lot of y'all know Miss Marge Willis. So she said when she was a teenager, Betty and her mother belonged to the same garden club, and for their May meeting, they would go down to Alligator Point, down to the beach. And she said, she was a teenager riding with these 2 ladies down to the garden club meeting, and she said they kept stopping to dig wildflowers on the side of the road. They kept stopping and digging. She said, "I was just saying, will we ever get to the beach?" So finally they stopped and said Miss Betty was over there in the edge of the woods digging. Okay, well, I'll finish the story first. So Miss Betty was over there digging, and she said, Marge says, you know, Miss Betty's not big as a minute. And she said, here she came striking past me like a house afire, you know, and Marge was going, what? And she said, Miss Betty was hollering, I smell a rattlesnake. And there's Marge, a teenager, going, what does a rattlesnake smell like? And so Marge was trying to leave too, and she said, it smells like an old billy goat. And Marge said, I still don't know what an old billy goat or a rattlesnake smells like. But she says, Betty Jenright can root a dead stick, is what Marge said. So we are so delighted to honor this garden and appreciate all the work that Beth did. Beth, if you'll come now, we'll give this to you. For Miss Betty Jenright and the passion and love that she has for gardening and for native plants. Would you want to say anything about Miss Betty?
It's such a joy to know Betty and to learn from her as she learned from her elders. I spent a lovely couple of hours with her Monday afternoon, taking these photographs, some of these photographs, and interviewing her. And she called me the next morning and said she didn't think she could come because her husband had taken a turn for the worse, and he's been failing gradually for several months. And she called me late yesterday afternoon and said he had passed away at 1 yesterday afternoon. So that's why she's not here. She really wanted to be here, and she said she was so appreciative of this award and this acknowledgement, presenting a source of light for her during this time of difficulty. So, she's very appreciative. Thank you.